Dawn had barely broken, but the first slivers of light were already seeping through the old rickety window on the outskirts of Harmony Creek, Pennsylvania. Morning, typically a promise of new beginnings, offered Shanice Braithwaite only a thin veil over the terror gnawing at her soul. Lying beside Lavelle, her husband, still deep in slumber, she squeezed her eyes shut, trying to banish the image of Jermaine's eyes, her stepson's eyes she'd seen too many times during her sleepless nights. A chilling secret had bound them, and with every tick of the clock, they drew closer to the moment when that truth would be exposed, shattering the fragile peace of their fabricated normalcy. The church bells chimed from downtown Harmony Creek, rousing the town from its sleep, yet they couldn't dispel the shadows that clung to the Braithwaite home. Lavelle Braithwaite, 45, his dark skin etched with the wrinkles of 45 years of hard labor, his stubble flecked with gray, and his eyes sunken with fatigue, had risen at 6 a.m., as he had for the past 2 decades. His heavy footsteps on the creaky floorboards echoed through the small house nestled on the town's outskirts. It was an ordinary morning, but Lavelle couldn't shake a heavy feeling. Something gnawed at his mind, like gears stuck in an engine that he, a seasoned mechanic, usually knew how to fix. He vaguely heard Shanice stir beside him, a faint movement that carried an invisible weight, as if she were trying to evade something even heavier than her sleep. Lavelle silently stepped into the bathroom, gazing at his reflection in the old mirror. His dark complexion, a mark of his ancestry and years of struggling through life, now bore the additional lines of time. He worked at Bobby's Auto Repair, a local garage. The income was steady but modest, just enough to support his family of 3 in their small house, but far from enough to fulfill his long-held dreams of a better life. He dreamt of sending Jermaine to the best university, a place where his son could escape the endless cycle of manual labor, free from the scrutinizing glances and subtle prejudices that he and other African Americans often faced in this small town. After washing his face, he headed to the kitchen and put on coffee. The rich aroma diffused, offering a faint solace to his troubled spirit. 15 minutes later, Shanice, his wife of 8 years, appeared in the kitchen, a 49-year-old woman with long braids gathered into a neat high ponytail. Her figure was still attractive, though the years had left their indelible mark. She worked as a waitress at the Bluebird Cafe in downtown Harmony Creek, where all the town gossip and news gathered. It was there that whispers about interracial couples, about new African-American families moving in, sometimes reached her ears, making her feel stifled and scrutinized, though she tried to ignore it. That subtle discrimination wasn't overt, but it lingered in glances, veiled comments, and missed opportunities. "Is Jermaine still asleep?" Lavelle asked, without lifting his eyes from his cup. "He always is. That boy will sleep his life away," Shanice said with a hint of irritation, though the way she pronounced her stepson's name sounded odd to a careful listener. Jermaine Braithwaite, Lavelle's 17-year-old son from his first marriage, was still sound asleep in his room. A tall, athletically built boy, he was the pride of the local high school basketball team, dreaming of an athletic scholarship to escape Harmony Creek. Dark-skinned like his father, Jermaine had inherited his expressive features and penetrating gaze from his mother, who had died when he was 9. "Jermaine!" Lavelle called loudly. "It's 7:30 already. You'll be late." A few minutes later, the sleepy teenager appeared in the kitchen. He nodded faintly to his father and avoided looking at Shanice, who set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "Thanks," he mumbled. "Working out late tonight?" Lavelle asked. "Yeah, Coach wants to work on the new scheme before Friday's game." "Don't forget you have to go to the clinic tomorrow to get your results," Dad reminded him. "It's important for the athletic scholarship." Jermaine grimaced. "I know. I'll stop by after school." Shanice stood with her back turned to the table, her shoulders visibly tensed at the mention of medical tests. A nameless anxiety hung over her. Lavelle, the honest African-American man, didn't notice this abnormality. His mind was preoccupied with the daily grind. "I'm off to work," Lavelle said, finishing his coffee. "I'll see you tonight." When the door closed behind him, a heavy silence settled in the kitchen. Jermaine quickly finished his breakfast, trying not to look at his stepmother. "Jermaine!" Shanice called softly when he was already in the doorway. "What?" he answered sharply. "Nothing. Have a good day." Their gazes met for a split second, and both felt a strange mixture of guilt, fear, and a forbidden attraction. That look, though fleeting, was enough to ignite an unquenchable flame, a promise of doom. The tension in their eyes was unlike any typical stepmother-stepson relationship. It was a chaotic mix of suppressed emotions, a stark truth they both desperately wanted to bury. Jermaine spent the entire school day as if in a fog. Lessons passed by his mind, and his thoughts returned to the events of 3 months ago. It had happened in April when Lavelle, his father, had gone to a weekend car show in Philadelphia. The house felt empty, and it was just Jermaine and Shanice at home. That Friday night, Shanice had opened a bottle of wine. They watched a movie on the couch, sitting too close to each other. First, the casual touches, then the awkward glances, and then something that should never have happened. Loneliness and longing had led to an unforgivable act, a blatant violation of trust and family bonds. Both carried their own voids. Shanice, with her fear of aging and solitude. Jermaine, with the emptiness after his birth mother's death and a longing to be understood. These voids, instead of being filled constructively, were exploited by a moment of weakness, creating a twisted, dark, and dangerous relationship. Their gazes met for a split second, and both felt a strange mixture of guilt, fear, and a forbidden attraction. That look, though fleeting, was enough to ignite an unquenchable flame, a promise of doom. The tension in their eyes was unlike any typical stepmother-stepson relationship. It was a chaotic mix of suppressed emotions, a stark truth they both desperately wanted to bury. Jermaine spent the entire school day as if in a fog. Lessons passed by his mind, and his thoughts returned to the events of 3 months ago. It had happened in April when Lavelle, his father, had gone to a weekend car show in Philadelphia. The house felt empty, and it was just Jermaine and Shanice at home. That Friday night, Shanice had opened a bottle of wine. They watched a movie on the couch, sitting too close to each other. First, the casual touches, then the awkward glances, and then something that should never have happened. Loneliness and longing had led to an unforgivable act, a blatant violation of trust and family bonds. Both carried their own voids. Shanice, with her fear of aging and solitude. Jermaine, with the emptiness after his birth mother's death and a longing to be understood. These voids, instead of being filled constructively, were exploited by a moment of weakness, creating a twisted, dark, and dangerous relationship. "Jermaine Braithwaite," a nurse's voice called out, pulling him from his thoughts. "Dr. Patterson is waiting for you in room 3. Dr. Patterson, an older woman with gray hair and kind eyes, greeted him with a discreet smile. "Have a seat, Jermaine," she said, pointing to a chair. "I have your test results." Something in her tone made him inwardly tense. A bad premonition washed over him, but he tried to remain calm. "Is there something wrong?" he asked, trying to keep his voice from trembling. Dr. Patterson folded her hands on the table, looking straight at him. Her eyes were filled with compassion, yet also carried a heavy burden. "Jermaine, you have human immunodeficiency virus in your blood, HIV." The world around Jermaine seemed to stop. The doctor's words echoed in his head, but their meaning did not reach his consciousness. He felt a huge rock pressing on his chest, and his entire body went numb. It's impossible," he finally squeezed out. "There must be a mistake." His voice was weak, lost in the quiet clinic room, but Dr. Patterson, with her compassionate eyes, shook her head. "We ran the test twice, Jermaine," she said softly. "The result is positive." Each of her words felt like a knife twisting in his heart, robbing him of any last hope of a mistake. He felt as if he were falling freely into a bottomless abyss, where everything he had once believed in was dissolving. "The result is positive," Dr. Patterson said softly. "But it's not a death sentence, Jermaine. Modern therapies allow you to live a full life. We'll begin therapy immediately." Thuston Jermaine heard her words, but couldn't grasp their meaning. HIV? How could that happen? A chill ran down his spine as he suddenly realized the horrifying truth. Shanice. She was his only sexual partner. It could only be her. His fear turned into furious anger. Had she known? Had she deliberately infected him? Or was she herself unaware of her own diagnosis? 1,000 questions screamed in his mind, pushing him to the brink of madness. "Yeah, I have to go," he said, standing up abruptly. "Jermaine, we need to discuss the treatment and—" Dr. Patterson tried to stop him, but he cut her off. "Later," he repeated. "I'll come later." He ran out of the clinic, panting, a rush of chaotic emotions overwhelming him. Shanice. Her name echoed in his head like a curse. He felt betrayed, deceived in the cruelest way possible. His entire life, his dreams, his basketball career, his chances at a college scholarship, all shattered in an instant. Without realizing where he was going, Jermaine found himself in Willow Creek Park, a familiar small park on the other side of town. Willow Creek Park, usually filled with the laughter of children and the chatter of elderly folks, now seemed bleak under his gaze. He collapsed onto a bench, his mind reeling. His hands trembled as he pulled out his cell phone. His fingers fumbled as he dialed Kashan's number. He needed someone, a friend, to share this terrible burden. "I need to talk to you," he said when his friend answered, his voice choked. "Now." 20 minutes later, Kashan found him still on the same bench, staring blankly into space. Kashan, his face etched with worry, sat down next to him. "What's wrong?" Kashan asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jermaine took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. I got the test results back," he began, his voice trembling. "I'm HIV positive." Kashan stared at his friend wide-eyed. The skinny kid with thick-rimmed glasses seemed unable to believe what he'd just heard. "What? How is that possible? You didn't—" Kashan started to say, but Jermaine cut him off. "I slept with Shanice," Jermaine blurted out, losing all composure. Now it was Kashan's turn to be speechless. "You what? With your stepmother? Are you serious?" Jermaine nodded, unable to say it out loud again. He felt utterly ashamed, but the truth had burst out. Impossible to conceal. Kashan looked at Jermaine with a complex expression. Shock, disbelief, and a profound sadness for his best friend. This wasn't just a secret. It was a catastrophe. A cruel betrayal that even Lavelle, Jermaine's respected father, could never have imagined. "It started 3 months ago," Jermaine continued after a pause. "It just happened. And now I think she's infected me." Kashan shook his head. "Jesus, Jermaine," he sighed. "You have to talk to her. Find out if she knew, and if she did, what then?" Kashan stopped talking, not knowing what to say next. He realized the situation was more complicated than anything he'd ever faced. "Then you'll have to decide what to do next, but talk to her first." Kashan's advice was simple, but the only way forward. While Jermaine wrestled with the horrifying truth that had just been exposed across Harmony Creek, Shanice was finishing her shift at the Bluebird Cafe. Her face was pale, her mind reeling with thoughts of Jermaine and his test results. She had known about her diagnosis for 3 years, but had chosen to keep it a secret from everyone, including her husband, Lavelle. The fear of a long-buried secret finally coming to light was suffocating her, like an invisible noose tightening. She keenly felt the scrutinizing gazes of the cafe's regulars, glances she always felt contained judgment, especially as she, an African-American woman, worked in such a public role in a town where subtle prejudices still lingered. Shanice got her medication from a clinic in Springfield, a neighboring town, where she went once a month under the pretext of seeing an old friend. She had carefully hidden her condition for 3 years, living in constant fear of being discovered. She knew that if Lavelle found out, he would not only feel betrayed, but might also fear for his own health. When her illicit affair with Jermaine began, she hadn't thought about the consequences. It was just a moment of weakness, a surrender to loneliness and a longing for affection that had morphed into something more, an invisible chain binding her to an unforgivable sin. And now, she feared the truth would be exposed, dragging not only her life, but also the lives of those around her, into the abyss. "Shanice, you're not yourself today," Berta, the cafe owner, said, her voice full of concern, her eyes sweeping over Shanice with scrutiny. Berta, a middle-aged white woman, had run the Bluebird Cafe for decades. She was always polite, but Shanice always felt an invisible barrier between them, a difference not just in social standing, but also in race. "No, nothing's wrong," Shanice lied, trying to force a strained smile. "Just tired." She hurried to gather her things, eager to leave this place, where every gaze seemed to pierce her soul. Berta still looked at her suspiciously, but said nothing more. When she got home, Shanice was surprised to find Lavelle already in the kitchen. He rarely came home so early. She tried to hide her nervousness, but her heart pounded erratically. "Did something happen?" she asked, trying to keep her voice normal. Bobby let me off early, not much work, Lavelle answered, his eyes examining her. He'd felt something amiss for weeks now, a subtle shift in the family atmosphere that he couldn't quite explain. Where's Jermaine? Didn't he have practice yet? I don't know, Shanice said, turning away to avoid her husband's gaze. Maybe he's out with friends. Lavelle watched his wife closely. He was a simple, honest man, but no fool. The change in Shanice's and Jermaine's attitudes had not escaped his notice. Shanice, what's going on? You've both been acting strange lately. Are you hiding something from me? He asked, his voice filled with suspicion, laced with a hint of hurt. He felt pushed out of his wife's and son's lives, a foreign feeling he hadn't experienced before. What are you talking about? Shanice tried to smile, but the smile came out strained. There's nothing going on. Don't lie to me. Lavelle's voice became harder, a rare deep resonance. I wasn't born yesterday. Something is going on between you two, and I want to know what it is. Shanice felt blood rush to her head. She knew she had to counterattack, to push back against her husband's suspicions. You're paranoid, Shanice snapped back, her face flushing. There's nothing going on. Maybe you're just jealous that I take the time to talk to your son, unlike you. It was a cruel accusation, a poisoned arrow shot straight at Lavelle's weak spot. He always felt he hadn't spent enough time with his son. He had sacrificed so much, working tirelessly to provide for his family, and now he was accused of being uncaring. That injustice infuriated him. Lavelle clenched his fists but held back. He knew that an argument now would lead nowhere. He didn't want to push things too far. I don't want to fight Shanice, he said, his voice heavy. But I sense that you are hiding something. At that moment, the front door opened and Jermaine entered the house. Seeing his father and stepmother in the kitchen, he froze. He sensed the tension in the air, a chilling silence that enveloped the room, like an electric charge waiting to ignite. Where have you been? Lavelle asked, his voice seeming to soften slightly with the third person present. Why weren't you at practice? I had to think, Jermaine answered, avoiding looking at Shanice. I'll make my way to my room. Dinner's in an hour, Shanice said, trying to sound normal. Jermaine nodded and quickly walked up the stairs to his room. Closing the door, he sat on his bed and wrapped his arms around his head. The conversation with Shanice was inevitable, and it had to take place tonight. Anger, resentment, fear, and despair, all these feelings mixed in him, forming a heavy lump in his chest. He knew his life would never be the same. At dinner, the atmosphere was so tense that it seemed the air could be cut with a knife. Lavelle ate in silence, occasionally casting glances back and forth at his wife and son, his eyes filled with suspicion and hurt. Shanice tried to maintain a semblance of normality by recounting events at the cafe, but her voice betrayed her forced cheer, like an actress trying to play her part in a tragic play. Jermaine barely touched his food. He just stirred his spaghetti, feeling nauseous. The silence, the furtive glances, and the clumsy lies had turned the family meal into a tragic play, where each member was concealing a part of a deadly truth. I'm going to go to my room, he said, pushing his plate away. I need to study for the test tomorrow. You've hardly eaten anything, Lavelle remarked, his eyes full of concern. Not hungry. When Jermaine left, Lavelle turned to Shanice. See? Something's wrong, and I intend to find out what it is. Lavelle's voice was firm, stripped of any softness now. He was too tired of this concealment. After dinner, Lavelle settled down in the living room, in front of the television, trying to distract himself from the thoughts tearing at his mind. He flipped through local news channels, watching stories about petty crimes in Harmony Creek. But his mind couldn't focus. He stared at the screen, but saw nothing but images of Shanice and Jermaine, and the secrets they were hiding. Shanice busied herself with cleaning up the kitchen, the gentle clinking of dishes creating a jarring sound in the heavy silence. Jermaine, sitting in his room, could hear the sounds of the television from downstairs. He knew his father wouldn't be going to bed anytime soon, but the conversation with Shanice couldn't wait. It had to happen now, before it was too late, before these secrets consumed them all. He quietly descended the stairs and slipped into the kitchen. Shanice was standing at the sink, her back to him. Her back looked so fragile under the dim kitchen light, like a statue bracing itself against an approaching storm. We need to talk, he said quietly, but firmly. Shanice flinched and turned around. When she saw the look on her stepson's face, she knew he knew. No explanation was needed, no question asked, just that look, and she understood that everything had come undone. Her face went pale, her lips trembling. "Not here," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the living room. "Your father will hear." "Then where?" Jermaine asked, his voice growing sharper. Shanice thought for a moment. She needed a private place, somewhere they could talk without fear of Lavelle discovering them. "Tomorrow I'll say I'm going to a friend's house," she whispered. "Meet me at Harmony Creek Lake at 4 Sarskis." It was the only place she could think of, a secluded spot with few people passing by on weekdays. That solitude, in a strange way, felt more menacing than safe, as if the secrets shared there would forever be swallowed by the lake. Jermaine wanted to object, to say that it couldn't wait, that this conversation needed to happen immediately, but he realized that the conversation would be difficult, and it would be better to hold it where they wouldn't be overheard. He also needed time to gather his thoughts, to prepare for this confrontation. "All right," he finally agreed. "Tomorrow at 4 by the lake." His voice was cold, but inside him, a furious fire was burning. "But this conversation will happen, Shanice, and you will have to answer all my questions." He emphasized each word, as if to engrave this promise in her mind. With those words, he went back to his room, leaving Shanice standing alone in the kitchen, clutching a kitchen towel, trying to hold back the trembling in her hands. She felt as if a rock was pressing on her chest. Everything was falling apart, little by little, like a sandcastle being washed away by the waves. She knew that tomorrow she would have to face an undeniable truth, a truth that would change everything. The feeling of being followed from the morning returned, but now, the fear of being discovered by Jermaine was even greater than the fear of the darkness. It was the ultimate loneliness, as both of the most important men in her life were now on the brink of collapse because of her secrets. The next morning, the sky over Harmony Creek was overcast. Gray clouds hung low, as if foreshadowing an inevitable storm. Jermaine had stayed up all night, replaying the conversation with his stepmother. Anger, resentment, fear, and despair. All these feelings mixed in him, forming a heavy lump in his chest. He looked out the window. The bare trees etched dark silhouettes against the gray sky, mirroring his own mood, a bleak landscape reflecting the turmoil within him. At breakfast, Lavelle noticed his son's pallor and inflamed eyes. "Are you sick?" he asked, frowning. "No, I just didn't sleep well," Jermaine replied, not looking at his father. Shanice pretended to be absorbed in preparing breakfast for Lavelle, but Jermaine could feel her tension. It radiated from her in waves, like an invisible electric current spreading throughout the kitchen. She too had endured a sleepless night, tormented by thoughts of the upcoming meeting. "Don't forget the medical results," Lavelle reminded Jermaine. Jermaine and Shanice froze at the same time, without speaking. Both knew Lavelle was referring to the general health checkup results, part of the athletic scholarship application, not Jermaine's HIV test results. "Yeah, I already took them," Jermaine said, trying to keep his voice steady. "All right?" Lavelle raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" "Yeah," Jermaine lied. "Everything's fine." Shanice exhaled so quietly that no one heard. Her shoulders relaxed a little. Though she knew the truth would soon be exposed, delaying it even for a moment was enough to bring her a fragile sense of relief, like a fleeting dewdrop on a leaf about to vanish. The day stretched agonizingly slow. At school, Jermaine couldn't concentrate on any subject. He just stared at his textbook, but the letters danced before his eyes, forming no meaning. Kashan tried to talk to him several times, but only got one-word answers. "Did you talk to her?" Kashan finally asked at lunchtime, making sure no one could hear them. "Today," Jermaine answered grimly. "4 is by the lake." "Would you like me to go with you?" his friend suggested. "I'll be nearby just in case." Jermaine wanted to say no, but then he thought he could use the support. "Okay," he agreed, "but stay out of it. This has to be a conversation between us." He knew Kashan would be his only pillar in this moment, a friend he could completely trust, a foothold in the storm. At 4 sharp, Jermaine arrived at Harmony Creek Lake. It was on the outskirts of the city in a small forest park where few people went on weekdays. The air here was always still and somewhat gloomy, especially in winter, when the bare trees etched dark silhouettes against the gray sky. Shanice was already waiting for him, sitting on a bench by the water. Her dark skin contrasted sharply with the bright red dress she wore, for some reason, for this meeting. that vibrant red, a strange choice for such a dramatic encounter, felt like a premonition of blood and destruction. When she saw her stepson, she tensed but tried to smile, a strained smile that couldn't hide the anxiety tormenting her. "Hi," she said, trying to sound casual, as if they were just two acquaintances meeting by chance. "You wanted to talk?" Jermaine stopped a few feet away from her, arms crossed over his chest. His eyes were cold, devoid of any tenderness or longing he might have once felt. "I have HIV," he said without preamble, his voice cold and definitive, like a knife thrust. "And you're the only person I could have gotten it from." Shanice turned pale but quickly pulled herself together. "What nonsense!" She was indignant, trying to play one last act. "How can you say that? Maybe you had other—" "I haven't," Jermaine interrupted her, his voice full of certainty and bitterness. "You know that very well. You're my first and only." His words were like bullets hitting her mind, leaving her no escape. Shanice stood up, her hands trembling. She looked around in desperation as if searching for a way to escape that didn't exist. But then her shoulders slumped as if all strength had left her. Her face was now bloodless, showing only despair and resignation. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice weak, lost in the vastness of the lake. "It was a mistake. This whole thing is a huge mistake." Her confession, though faint, carried a terrible weight, like a thunderclap to Jermaine, confirming his worst suspicions. "So you knew?" Jermaine took a step toward her, his voice filled with anger. "Did you know about your diagnosis?" Shanice looked away, avoiding his gaze, eyes that once held longing, now only held hatred. "Yes, for 3 years now." Jermaine felt something inside him snap. One thing was to suspect, and quite another to hear a direct, cold confession, utterly devoid of remorse. Anger flared within him like a fierce fire, consuming everything. "Did you deliberately infect me?" His voice trembled with restrained rage, a rage he never knew he possessed. "No!" Shanice exclaimed, her voice also growing sharper. "I swear I didn't mean it. It was just... we got carried away and I forgot to take precautions." Her words sounded hollow, like a weak excuse for an unforgivable act, a blatant lie to save herself. "You forgot?" Jermaine couldn't believe his ears. He let out a bitter laugh. "You forgot you have a deadly virus?" "It's not deadly," Shanice corrected him, her voice suddenly sharp, calculated. "There are drugs now, therapies. People have been living with it for decades." She tried to downplay the severity of the issue, turning it into a mere medical condition, but that only made Jermaine angrier. "And you think that excuses you?" Jermaine felt himself shaking, his whole body trembling with indignation. "You ruined my life, my basketball career, my chances at a scholarship, a normal life." Tears streamed down his face. He felt like an animal cornered, stripped of everything he had ever dreamed of, every bright future he had envisioned. "Don't be dramatic." Shanice tried to take his hand, but he recoiled, feeling disgusted by her touch. "You'll take your medication and you'll be fine. No one will know." "No one will know." Jermaine laughed bitterly, a laugh filled with pain and contempt. "What about your father? He has a right to know that his wife is sleeping with his son and has infected him with HIV. Shanice's face turned even paler, devoid of any life. "You wouldn't dare tell him?" "Yes, I would." Jermaine's words were like a declaration of war, pushing Shanice into a corner. She knew that if this truth were exposed, everything would collapse, not just for her, but also for Lavelle, and for the family they had built on lies. "Then you will ruin not only my life, but his as well." Shanice suddenly turned rigid, her eyes flashing with malice. "Think what will happen to him when he finds out that his son slept with his wife, that his own son betrayed him in this way." She tried to turn the tables, blaming Jermaine, making him the guilty party, the one who would destroy the family. "Don't try to shift the blame," Jermaine snapped back, his voice full of righteous anger. "You're older. You're responsible." "Oh, I'm sure the court won't see it that way," Shanice smiled, but her smile was cold and threatening. A healthy 17-year-old guy, a basketball star, seduced a 49-year-old woman. Who do you think they're going to believe? It was a cruel threat, a chilling warning, showing Shanice was willing to do anything to protect her secret, even if it meant destroying Jermaine's future. She was no longer the meek, remorseful woman. She had transformed into a venomous snake, ready to strike to protect herself. You are blackmailing me?" Germain asked, his voice filled with disbelief and outrage. "I'm protecting both of us," Shanice said, taking a step toward him, her eyes calculating. "Look, Germain, what we had between us was a mistake. We both know that, but telling Lavelle would only make it worse. He'll lose his wife and his son. Is that what you want?" Shanice's threat was like a noose tightening around Germain, pushing him into an impossible dilemma where every choice led to suffering. Germain felt his anger give way to despair. "What about me? How do I go on?" "The same way you did before." Shanice put her hand on his shoulder, her voice softer but still calculating. "You'll take your meds, play basketball, go to college. No one will know anything." She tried to reassure him, but her words felt like knives cutting into his soul, a cruel mockery of what he had lost. "And our relationship? It's gone," Shanice said firmly. "What we had was a mistake we won't make again." Germain turned away, looking at the dark water of the lake. He felt nauseous. "I have to think about it," he said, his voice weak. "Don't do anything stupid," Shanice warned him, her voice filled with a chilling menace. "If you tell your father or anyone else, I'll destroy your reputation. No college, no career. Everyone will know you slept with your stepmother." With those words, she turned and walked away quickly, leaving Germain standing by the water, feeling as if the ground was slipping from under his feet. He felt cold to the bone, not just from the lake wind but from Shanice's cruelty. Loneliness enveloped him, a loneliness no one could share, a burden too heavy for a 17-year-old. When Shanice was out of sight, Cachon approached Germain. He had listened to the entire conversation from a distance, his heart pounding in his chest. "I didn't hear everything but enough," he said, putting a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Did she threaten you?" "Yes." Germain sighed heavily. "She knew about her diagnosis, Cachon. She knew, and still... that." "That's a crime," Cachon said, his voice full of indignation. "You could have reported her to the police." "What would I say? That I slept with my stepmother?" Germain grinned bitterly. "No, she's right. It would ruin my father's life. I can't do that to him." Cachon looked at his friend, his eyes complex, filled with helplessness. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Germain admitted, his voice lost in the vastness of the lake. "Honestly, I just don't know." He felt trapped in a labyrinth, with no way out. Meanwhile, as Shanice returned home, she found Lavelle already there, sitting on the living room couch with an uncharacteristically pensive expression on his face. A wave of anxiety washed over her. He was rarely home at this hour. "You're early?" she remarked, trying to sound casual, the fake smile still lingering on her lips. "Yeah, I didn't have work," he replied, looking at her carefully, his eyes seeming to pierce her soul. "Where have you been?" "At a friend's, I told you." Shanice tried not to show her nervousness, but her heart pounded erratically, like a warning drum. "And how are you? Are you okay?" "I don't know." Lavelle got up from the couch, his eyes weary and disappointed. "You tell me. Are you all right, Shanice?" Something in his tone made her extremely wary. "What is it?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but a storm raged within her. "You and Germain?" He paused, his eyes fixed on her face, full of suspicion. "Something is going on between you two, and I want to know what it is." Shanice felt her heart start to beat faster, but outwardly she remained calm. She knew this was the decisive moment, the time she had to fight to keep what little remained. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried to smile. "It's business as usual between us." "Don't lie to me." Lavelle stepped closer, his voice as hard as steel. "I'm not blind. You've both been acting strange for months now, avoiding each other. And yet, you're constantly exchanging glances. What's going on, Shanice?" "Nothing," she exclaimed, her voice cracking with tension. "Germain's going through puberty and he's acting weird around everyone, and I'm just tired of your constant suspicions." She knew that the best defense is offense and decided to turn the tables. "Speaking of suspicions," she continued, her voice now regaining its sharp edge, "you're so distrustful of me. Maybe because you're hiding something. Is there a reason why you're so often late for work?" Lavelle backed away, clearly not expecting this turn of events. He, an African-American man, was used to being unjustly suspected by outsiders, but to be questioned by his own wife was a shock. He had tried to live an honest life, staying out of trouble, and now he was being accused by the wife he loved. Don't change the subject, he muttered, still stunned. I sense something is wrong, and I'm going to find out what it is. Shanice realized she had to change tactics. She had gone too far with the direct attack. She walked over to her husband and put her arms around him. Lavelle, honey, I'm sorry, she said softly, her voice falsely sweet. I didn't mean to fight. It's just that there's been so much stress at work lately, and I've been taking it out on you. It's not right. She felt him relax a little in her embrace, a sign that he still loved her, still wanted to believe her. Let's have a romantic evening, she suggested, her voice seductive. Just you and me. I'll cook your favorite dish. We'll open some wine, just like old times. Lavelle hesitated, but then nodded. He yearned for peace, for a return to the days when he believed their lives were still simple and happy. Good, he agreed. But this conversation is not over, Shanice. Of course it isn't, dear, she smiled, a radiant but empty smile. We'll talk about everything that's troubling you, but later. She had temporarily appeased him, but the cracks in their relationship were too deep, impossible to mend with just an empty promise and a fake romantic dinner. Meanwhile, while Shanice was busy preparing the romantic dinner for Lavelle, trying to soothe his suspicions, Jermaine was sitting in the office of Mrs. Caldwell, the school psychologist at Harmony Creek High School. He hadn't intended to come here, but his feet had led him to her door after his painful conversation with Shanice. Mrs. Caldwell, a full-bodied African-American woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an attentive gaze, greeted him with a smile. It was a complete contrast to Shanice's coldness and a beacon of hope in Jermaine's desperate night, an invitation to truth and the support he desperately needed. Jermaine, Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice warm and gentle, what can I do for you? He stammered, not knowing where to begin, the words catching in his throat. I have a problem. Have a seat, she pointed to the chair across from her, her eyes full of patience and understanding. And tell me what's bothering you. Jermaine sat down, nervously tugging at the edge of his t-shirt. He felt confused, but also a sense of relief being in a safe space where he wouldn't be judged. If I tell, you won't tell anyone? He asked, his voice full of worry, his eyes searching her face. Everything you say here stays between us, Mrs. Caldwell assured him, unless your life or the lives of others are in danger. Jermaine took a deep breath, as if gathering all his remaining courage. Yeah, I found out I have HIV. Mrs. Caldwell froze for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. Her professionalism had prepared her for moments like this. I understand, she said calmly. When did you find out? Yesterday. I took a test for an athletic scholarship and... He couldn't finish the sentence, tears beginning to roll down his cheeks. It's hard news, the psychologist said gently, her voice full of compassion. But you can live a full life now with this diagnosis. Have you already seen a doctor to prescribe therapy? Yes, but... Jermaine hesitated, his eyes darkening. It's not just that. I know who gave it to me. And that bothers you, Mrs. Caldwell said, completing his sentence, her eyes growing sharper. That person knew about their diagnosis? Jermaine felt a lump come up in his throat, a terrible truth stuck there. They knew, and yet they still didn't warn me. Mrs. Caldwell frowned. This is serious, Jermaine. If a person knowingly put you at risk of infection by knowing their HIV status, that's a crime. I know, he lowered his head, his voice weak. But I can't report this person. It would ruin too many lives, including my father's. The psychologist remarked, Jermaine, I'm not going to force you to do anything, but I want you to know that what happened was not your fault, and you have the right to protect yourself and others. Others? Jermaine looked up, a new light dawning in his eyes. A new thought suddenly sparked in his mind. If this person knowingly put you at risk, who's to say they wouldn't do it to someone else? That thought hadn't crossed his mind. What if Shanice infected his father, or anyone else in the future? This new fear, instead of driving him to despair, gave him a sense of responsibility. Yeah, I'll have to think about it, he said at last, his voice now more determined. Of course, Mrs. Caldwell nodded. But remember, you're not alone, and whatever you decide, I will support you. Mrs. Caldwell understood that, within the African American community, the stigma around HIV was still immense, and exposing such a secret could lead to severe consequences not just for the individual, but for their entire family. Therefore, emotional support and confidentiality were paramount for individuals like Germain, who were burdened by illness and societal prejudice. When Germain returned home, he found Shanice preparing a celebratory dinner. The smell of spices and roasted meat filled the house, creating a false atmosphere of warmth. "What's going on?" he asked, meeting his father in the living room. Lavelle was sitting in his armchair, watching the news with a slightly more relaxed expression, a temporary respite after his tense conversation with Shanice. "Shanice decided to have a romantic evening," Lavelle replied, looking a little embarrassed. "She said she wanted to make amends for being irritable lately." Germain felt a pang of jealousy and was immediately ashamed of it. The jealousy wasn't just about their relationship, but about the false peace Shanice was creating for Lavelle, a peace built on deceit. "I see," he said. "I guess I'll have dinner in my room then." He didn't want to be a part of this charade. "No, no." Shanice looked out of the kitchen, her smile too wide, too fake, like a mask hiding panic. "I've made some for you. Just take it up to your room, okay?" That smile, a smile Germain had never seen on his stepmother, gave him a premonition of bad things to come, a chilling feeling that crept into his soul. Germain nodded and went upstairs. An hour later, Shanice brought him a plate of dinner. Lavelle was in the shower. "Lavelle's in the shower," she said quietly, her voice hurried and anxious. She placed the plate on the nightstand. "Look, Germain, we need to stick together for his sake." She looked at him with pleading eyes filled with fear and desperation. "I've been thinking about it," Germain replied, looking her straight in the eye, his gaze determined, free of any fear now. "And I won't tell him. Not yet." "Thank you," Shanice exhaled with relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "You made the right decision." "But I want you to know," he continued, looking her straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for my father. And if I find out you're putting him or anyone else at risk, I'll tell you everything." His voice was cold, definitive, like an oath. Shanice tensed, but nodded. She knew this wasn't an empty threat. "I understand," she said. "Don't worry, I'm taking care of your father very carefully." She tried to reassure him, but in her voice there was still a hint of fear and anxiety about an uncertain future. When she left, Germain looked at the plate of food, but had no appetite. He set it aside and lay back on the bed, looking up at the ceiling. How could things have gotten so messed up? His family, his life, everything had changed in just a few days. He felt a heavy burden on his shoulders, a huge responsibility he never thought he'd have to bear. Now, he not only had to face his illness, but also protect his father from a woman he had once slept with, a woman who had ruined his life. At that time, Lavelle, stepping out of the shower, accidentally hit the bathroom shelf, and Shanice's small cosmetic bag fell out. It opened and the contents spilled out onto the floor: lipstick, powder, and a vial of pills. Lavelle picked it up and read the name. It was HIV medication. He froze, unable to believe his eyes. Shanice had never told him about her diagnosis. Why had she kept it from him? And how long had she known? 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, each one a knife plunging into his heart, tearing apart the trust he had placed in her. He felt agonizingly betrayed, not just by a secret, but by years of deceit. With the vial in his hand, he walked out of the bathroom and down to the living room, where Shanice was already waiting for him with a glass of wine. She smiled, oblivious that the moment of reckoning had arrived. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the vial, his voice dry and cold. Shanice turned pale and dropped the glass. The shattering sound echoed in the silent room, and red wine spilled over the white tablecloth like blood, a grim omen of what was to come. "Lavelle, she stammered, her voice lost. "I can explain, and I hope so." He sat down across from her, his eyes filled with anger and disappointment. "Because I'm really wondering why my wife is hiding from me that she has HIV." Shanice nervously licked her lips, tears beginning to well up. "I was afraid you would leave," she said quietly, her voice weak. "That you wouldn't want to be with me if you found out." "How long have you known?" 3 years, she admitted, her voice filled with remorse. "I found out a year before we were married, and all that time you've been lying to me." Lavelle shook his head, his voice filled with pain. "Putting me at risk." "No," Shanice exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. "I've always been careful, and I'm on medication." My virus has been undetectable in my blood for 2 years. I couldn't have infected you." Lavelle looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with doubt. "I don't know if I can believe you, Shanice, not after a lie like that." "Please," she took his hand, her voice pleading. "I love you. I was just afraid of losing you." Lavelle gently but firmly released her hand. "I need to think about it," he said, his voice heavy. "This is too serious to decide now." Dinner passed in tense silence. Shanice tried to make conversation, but Lavelle answered in one word, his eyes still distant, lost in the thoughts tearing at his mind. Germaine, who had come down toward the end of dinner, sensed that something had happened, but couldn't figure out what it was. The atmosphere was too heavy, like a rock pressing down on everyone in the house. "Was something wrong?" he asked, looking from his father to his stepmother. "No," they answered at the same time. Too quickly, too falsely. Germaine didn't believe it, but he decided not to insist. He had enough problems as it was. After dinner, Lavelle retired to his bedroom, saying he was tired. Shanice was left alone in the kitchen, putting away the dishes. Her hands were shaking. Everything was falling apart. First, Germaine had found out about her diagnosis and their affair. Now, Lavelle had found her medication. She felt the walls shrinking around her, the air becoming suffocating, like a box slowly closing in. Finished with cleaning up, she grabbed her jacket and left the house. She needed to think, and the best place to think was by Harmony Creek Lake. It was quiet, peaceful, just water and stars. Shanice walked down the dark street, not noticing someone's shadow following her, an invisible dark figure waiting to end everything. Early morning, a thick fog drifted over Harmony Creek Lake as Maureen Johnson, a 60-year-old African-American woman, went out for her usual jog. She started every morning with a 2-mile route around the body of water. Today the air was particularly still and chilly, only her rhythmic footsteps on the dirt path breaking the silence. As she was running along the water's edge, her eyes suddenly caught something unusual near the reeds, a dark silhouette too large for a fallen branch. She slowed down, her heart pounding, a sense of unease creeping in. As she got closer, Maureen saw a woman's body half submerged in the water. Dark skin, a red dress soaked with water and blood, long braids strewn across the surface. Maureen's scream cut through the morning silence, marking the beginning of a tragic investigation, a calamity that would shake the small town of Harmony Creek. With trembling hands, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. 20 minutes later, the quiet lakeshore was a crime scene. Police cars with flashing red and blue lights, yellow caution tape, uniformed officers standing solemnly, and forensic scientists in white jumpsuits meticulously gathering evidence. Detective Latoya Harbison was one of the last to arrive. A dark-skinned woman of 37 with short dreadlocks pulled back into a tight bun and penetrating brown eyes, she had a reputation as one of the best homicide detectives in the Harmony Creek Police Department. She possessed a unique blend of strength, determination, and a deep understanding of the hidden stories behind crimes, especially within her own community. "What do we got?" she asked the officer guarding the perimeter, her voice calm but authoritative. "Female African-American, looks to be in her 50s, found at approximately 6:30 a.m. by a local resident." Latoya walked over to where Dr. Ramirez, the medical examiner, was leaning over the body. "Good morning, doctor. What can you tell me?" Dr. Ramirez straightened up, his face grim. "Detective Harbison, female, approximately 45 to 50 years old, multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck. Preliminary cause of death is blood loss. Time of death between 10 p.m. and midnight." "Any guesses as to the identity?" Latoya asked, her eyes scanning the body, trying to discern any detail. A wallet was found in her purse with a driver's license in the name of Shanice Braithwaite, 49 years old, residing at 23 Claremont Street. Latoya frowned. "Looks like a murder in the heat of passion. Multiple stabbings usually indicated strong emotions, anger, or personal vendetta." "Anything else unusual?" Dr. Ramirez pointed to the victim's hands. "Signs of a struggle? Broken nails?" She fought back fiercely. He paused for a moment, as if contemplating. "And there's also an oversized boot print here, near the water's edge. Probably the killer's." Latoya nodded and began to look around. The lake was in a relatively deserted area, especially in the evening. a perfect place for a hidden murder. Who had discovered the body first? She asked one of the officers. Maureen Johnson, a local resident. She's over there. The officer pointed to an elderly woman sitting on a bench in the distance, being comforted by a female police officer. Latoya approached the witness. Mrs. Johnson, I'm Detective Latoya Harbison. Can you tell us what you saw? Maureen, still pale with shock, nodded, her voice trembling. I run around the lake every morning. Today, as usual, I went out at 6 a.m. As I was running along the east shore, I saw something in the water near the reeds. At first, I thought it was trash or a branch. But when I got closer, she shuddered. It was horrible. Latoya took careful notes, knowing that even the smallest details could lead to crucial clues. She thanked Mrs. Johnson and assured her that they would find the culprit. Finished with her debriefing, Latoya went back to the body. Forensics was already collecting evidence, soil samples, fibers from clothing, photographs. A forensic specialist was carefully collecting mud samples from under Shanice's fingernails. Detective, one of the techs called out to her, his voice full of discovery. We found this in the bushes 10 yards from here, covered by a layer of fallen leaves. He showed her a transparent evidence bag containing a kitchen knife with a wooden handle stained with blood. Looks like the murder weapon, Latoya observed, her eyes sharpening. Check for prints and DNA. The next step was to notify the victim's family. For Latoya, an African-American detective, she understood that cases involving her community often presented more challenges, sometimes subtle biases within the system itself. She knew she needed to be doubly cautious to ensure justice was served, not just for the victim, but for those involved, especially when circumstances could become sensitive. She wouldn't let any prejudice hinder her work. At the address on the driver's license, Latoya and her partner, Detective Marcus Green, a tall white man, arrived around 9 a.m. The Braithwaite house was a modest, one-story structure with a small garden, looking eerily peaceful in stark contrast to the horrifying news they carried. Latoya pressed the doorbell, and within seconds, the door was opened by a middle-aged man, Lavelle Braithwaite. When he heard about Shanice's death, his face turned ashen, as if struck by lightning. Lavelle Braithwaite, I'm Detective Harbison. This is Detective Green. We're with the Harmony Creek Police Department, Latoya said, her voice full of sympathy, yet maintaining professionalism. May I come in? Lavelle frowned but stepped back, letting them pass, his legs swaying slightly. What's going on? He asked, his voice trembling, his eyes filled with confusion and a hint of fear. I'm afraid we have some bad news. It concerns your wife, Shanice. Her body was discovered this morning at Harmony Creek Lake. I'm very sorry, but your wife is dead. According to preliminary reports, it's a homicide. Lavelle swayed and slumped in his chair, his face turning ash gray, his eyes blank and vacant. He tried to process it, to find an explanation for this unbelievable tragedy, but his mind was utterly empty. It can't be, he whispered, his voice choked. I saw her last night. She said she was going for a walk. His utter shock and grief were a haunting sight, a powerful polarization between his ordinary life and his wife's sudden death. At that moment, a teenager appeared in the hallway, coming down the stairs. Tall, athletic, with a look of alarm on his face, his eyes scanning everyone present. Dad, what's going on? Jermaine asked, his eyes widening with fear at the sight of the police officers. Jermaine, Lavelle looked up at his son, his voice filled with pain. It's Shanice. Your stepmother was found dead this morning, Latoya said softly, her voice full of compassion. I'm so sorry. Jermaine froze, his eyes widening with shock. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Shanice's death, a woman he had just had a dramatic confrontation with, evoked complex emotions in him, shock, horror, and a touch of guilty relief, a relief he dared not admit. When was the last time you saw Shanice? Latoya asked Lavelle, her voice growing more serious. Last night around 9, we had a conversation. Then she said she wanted to take a walk, get some air. What was the conversation about? Lavelle cast a quick glance at his son, his eyes guarded. Personal, he said dryly. Family matters. Latoya noticed the look and the clear tension between father and son. She, an African-American detective, was all too familiar with the secrets and lies hidden within families. especially within her own community, where trust and protecting one another were paramount, sometimes leading to tragic consequences. What about you, Germaine? When was the last time you saw your stepmother? Last night, too, at dinner, he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding Latoya's gaze. Then I went to my room to do my homework. Something in his tone seemed insincere to Latoya. She sensed an anomaly, a concealment. She decided to let Marcus Green continue questioning Lavelle and Germaine while she began to search the house. She started in Shanice and Lavelle's bedroom. In a small cosmetic bag at the bottom of a drawer, she found a vial of pills, HIV medication. Interesting, she murmured, a light flickering in her mind. This was a crucial clue. Back in the living room, Latoya saw that Germaine had left, and Lavelle was sitting on the couch with a blank stare, as if his mind had drifted somewhere far away. "Mr. Braithwaite?" she asked, her voice growing more serious. "Did you know your wife had HIV?" Lavelle looked up at her, his eyes filled with shock and pain. "Yes, I found out yesterday. I found her medication by accident." "And how did you react?" "I was shocked. We'd been married 8 years and she kept it from me. We had a fight." "Is that what you talked about before she left?" "Yeah. I told her I needed to think about it, that I didn't know if I could trust her after lying to me like that." Latoya felt the puzzle pieces starting to fit together. A broken relationship, a revealed secret, a final argument. The next step was a visit to Germaine's school. School officials told Latoya that Germaine's best friend was Cashin Marrow. Latoya found him in the library. Cashin was sitting, reading intently. "Cashin Marrow, I'm Detective Harbison. Can we talk?" Cashin nervously adjusted his glasses, his eyes showing clear unease. "I'm investigating the death of Shanice Braithwaite, your friend Germaine's stepmother. I'm told you two are close." Cashin turned pale, his voice trembling. "Shanice dead?" "Yes," Latoya said. "When was the last time you saw Germaine?" "Yesterday after school, we went for a little walk. Then we split up." "Where exactly did you walk?" Cashin was visibly nervous. He looked around the library as if fearing someone might overhear. In the park and by the lake." Latoya was alert, her eyes sharpening. "The lake? The one where Shanice's body was found?" "Yes, but we were there in the afternoon, about 4 Sara." "And what were you doing there?" "Just, talking about school, basketball, the usual stuff." Latoya looked straight into his eyes, her gaze probing. "Cashin, I can tell there's something you're not telling me. This is a murder, a serious case. If you know something that can help the investigation, you should tell me." Cashin bit his lip, clearly struggling with himself, torn between a promise to his best friend and the weight of the truth. "I promised Germaine," he began, his voice weak, but then stopped talking. "What was going on between Germaine and his stepmother?" Latoya asked bluntly, determined not to miss any detail. Cashin took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. They were having an affair. Started a few months ago. Germaine told me last week when he found out he'd contracted HIV from her." Latoya felt the puzzle pieces starting to click into place, forming a terrifying and tragic picture. "Germaine confronted her at the lake yesterday," Cashin continued, "accused her of knowing about her diagnosis and having an affair with him anyway. She confessed, but then started threatening that, if he told his father, she would destroy his reputation." Latoya now had enough information to proceed with the next steps. She felt a surge of indignation. A woman had exploited a young man's emotions and trust, and then knowingly endangered him. This case wasn't just a murder, it was a story of betrayal and moral depravity. Back at the Harmony Creek Police Department, Latoya found that the autopsy results were in. Dr. Ramirez confirmed the cause of death as multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck, consistent with a murder committed in a fit of intense emotion. And another important fact: the victim was HIV positive. This information aligned with Cashin's testimony and Latoya's discovery of the medication vial in Shanice's house. Additionally, the results from the knife found at the scene were back. It had partial prints that could belong to Lavelle Braithwaite and traces of blood, both Shanice's and Lavelle's. All of this evidence pointed to one person, a horrifying suspicion, a grim picture of the crime steadily forming. With this new information, Latoya decided to get a more comprehensive search warrant for the Braithwaite home. A judge signed it the same day, recognizing the serious nature of the case and the initial evidence. LaToya, along with Detective Green and a search team, returned to Lavelle's modest house. This time, they weren't just looking for medication or documents, but for any trace that could link Lavelle to the crime scene. During their meticulous search, the police team utilized a professional K-9 unit, a German shepherd named Justice, renowned for his precise ability to sniff out biological and material evidence. Justice, with his sleek black coat and intelligent eyes, was handled by K-9 officer Mike O'Malley. Mike gave the command, and Justice began his work, carefully sniffing every nook and cranny of the house, from the living room to the kitchen to the bedrooms. The dog moved slowly, cautiously, his nose constantly working, scenting every faint odor. When they reached the garage, Justice suddenly became agitated. He let out a short bark and began pawing at an old plastic bin hidden in a corner beneath a dusty tarp. "Looks like Justice found something, Detective," Mike said, his eyes filled with anticipation. When they opened the bin, they found clothes, a gray shirt and blue jeans, both stained with dark, dried marks that looked like blood. A faint metallic smell of blood still lingered in the damp garage air. "Whose clothes are these?" LaToya asked Lavelle, her voice cold, devoid of any sympathy now. Lavelle froze, staring at the discovery, his face turning ashen, as if all the blood had drained from him. "Mine," he finally said, his voice weak, almost inaudible. All traces of denial seemed to have vanished from him. "Mr. Braithwaite, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us to the station for a statement." Lavelle offered no resistance. He knew everything was over, all his secrets exposed. He quietly followed the officers, his footsteps heavy, like a man who had just shed an immense burden. In the interview room, Lavelle sat across from Detective Harpison, hunched over and staring at a spot on the floor, his eyes vacant. The interview room, with its bright fluorescent lights and small, cramped space, felt suffocating and oppressive. "Mr. Braithwaite, we have solid evidence against you," LaToya said, her voice firm, showing no leniency. "A knife with your prints on it, bloody clothes hidden in your garage thanks to K-9 Justice's help, and motive. You found out about your wife's HIV status, that she kept it from you for years." Lavelle remained silent. He had no strength left to argue. He knew she had it all. "But I think it's more than that," LaToya continued, her eyes looking directly at Lavelle, full of understanding but also indignation. "You found out something else, didn't you? About Shanice's affair with your son, Jermaine." Lavelle flinched, his eyes reddening, and he looked up at the detective, his gaze filled with shock and pain. "How did you know?" his voice whispered, almost a confession. "We spoke to Cashon Merrow. He told us about the affair and how Shanice had deliberately exposed Jermaine to HIV, knowing her status. He told us about Jermaine's confrontation with her by Harmony Creek Lake yesterday." Lavelle covered his face with his hands, a sob escaping his throat, a sob filled with deep pain and regret. "I didn't want Jermaine to know," he said, his voice choked. "I didn't want him to feel guilty. I didn't want him to have to live with that burden." "Tell me what happened," LaToya asked more softly, her voice filled with empathy, knowing this was the crucial moment for his confession. "I accidentally found her medication yesterday. At first, I was just shocked that she was hiding her diagnosis. We had a huge argument, an argument I'd never had in my life." Lavelle paused, taking a deep breath, trying to control the emotions welling up within him. "But then, when she said she was going for a walk, I decided to check her phone. I just wanted to find out more about why she hid her illness from me. And I found messages between her and Jermaine. They were explicit, affectionate messages, veiled hints. I realized there was something between them, something terrible I couldn't believe. Then I saw more messages where Jermaine was texting her about his diagnosis, accusing her of being infected. She was responding so coldly, threatening him that if he told the truth, she would destroy his life." Lavelle's voice trembled with indignation and pain, every word a torment to him. "And you went to the lake?" LaToya asked, holding Lavelle's gaze. "Yes, I knew she was there. I wanted to talk to her, to find out the truth. I wanted to know why she did that to my son, the son I had trusted her with." He lifted his head, his eyes filled with despair and torment. "But when she confirmed everything, when she said she knew her status and still, with my son, my own son, I just lost control. Everything inside me collapsed. I grabbed the knife I carried for protection, a knife I usually used for cutting wires at the garage, and he couldn't finish, tears streaming down his face. "You stabbed her multiple times in a fit of rage," Latoya said, completing his sentence, her voice grim. "I don't remember how it happened," Lavelle said, his voice a whisper. "I just remember her eyes full of fear and blood. A lot of blood. And then I came to my senses, realized what I'd done. I dropped the knife and ran home, stashed my clothes in the garage, took a shower, and went to bed. I just wanted to forget everything, to wish it had never happened." "Mr. Braithwaite, do you realize you've confessed to murder?" "Yes," he answered quietly, his voice full of acceptance. "I deserve to be punished, but please don't tell Germain that I knew about them. Let him think I only killed her because of HIV. It's hard enough for him as it is." Lavelle, an African-American man, knew that the justice system could be harsh on people like him. He accepted his fate, but still tried to protect his son from the harsher truth, a truth that would forever haunt Germain's life. An hour later, Germain sat across from his father in the visiting room at the Harmony Creek County Jail, a cold and cramped space with a thick glass partition separating them. They spoke on the phone, the sound slightly distorted, adding another invisible barrier. He had been informed that his father was arrested for Shanice's murder. The shock and disbelief still lingered in his mind. "Dad!" Germain's voice shook, tears beginning to well up. "Tell me it's not true. Say you didn't kill her." He still clung to a faint hope that this was just a mistake, a nightmare. Lavelle looked at his son with eyes full of pain, his gaze filled with remorse, boundless love, and an acceptance of his fate. He saw that innocence had vanished from his son's eyes, replaced by pain and a bitter understanding of the world. "I can't say that, son," he said, his voice heavy. "I did it, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." "But why?" Germain asked, his voice filled with confusion and indignation. "Because of her HIV status? It wasn't worth her life, Dad." He thought that was the only reason strong enough for his father to act that way, a reason, though cruel, at least understandable. Lavelle was silent for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, wrestling with himself between keeping the final secret and revealing the whole truth so his son could understand. He looked into his son's stormy eyes, and he knew that Germain deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful. "I knew everything, Germain," Lavelle said, his voice deepening, heavy with emotion. "About you two, about her infecting you, knowing about her diagnosis." Germain turned pale. He felt an electric shock run down his spine, a shock even greater than when he received his HIV diagnosis. You knew?" he whispered, unable to believe his ears. "I found your messages on her phone. When I realized what she'd done to you, I lost my mind. I couldn't bear to see her hurt you like that." Germain began to sob uncontrollably, hot tears streaming down his face. He felt a strange mixture of relief that his father knew, and a terrible pain for the sacrifice his father had made for him. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said through his sobs. "I should have stopped it sooner. I should have told you." "It wasn't your fault," Lavelle said firmly, his eyes filled with forgiveness and love. "You were a child, and she was an adult. She was responsible. She took advantage of you, son." "What's going to happen now?" Germain asked through his tears, his voice filled with despair for the future. "I'll go to trial, probably get a long sentence, but I'll make sure you're okay. Aunt Marva will look after you. She's a good woman. She'll love you like her own." He tried to reassure his son, even as he himself faced an uncertain future. "What about my, diagnosis?" Dr. Patterson said, "With the right treatment, you can live a normal life. I've already arranged for all expenses to be covered by my insurance." Lavelle, a father, despite his grave crime, still tried to do what was best for his son, ensuring that Germain's life still had a future, a small glimmer of hope. 3 months later, Germain sat on the familiar bench by Harmony Creek Lake, looking out at the calm water. Today was the last day of his father's trial at Fairview County Courthouse. Lavelle had been found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years in a state prison. Their lives had changed completely, a transformation no one could have anticipated, a cruel destiny that had befallen this seemingly ordinary family. Germain now lived with Aunt Marva, his father's sister, in another part of Harmony Creek. Aunt Marva was a strong and kind woman who had opened her arms to him, providing him with a new home, though it couldn't fully fill the void in his heart. He continued to attend Harmony Creek High School and play basketball, now with a stronger will than ever. Although much had changed, he was taking his antiretroviral medication regularly, and his viral load was already undetectable. Doctors said that with this level of treatment, he could live a long, healthy life. But the scars on his soul, the memories of betrayal, Shanice's death, and his father's imprisonment would forever remain, a painful reminder of what had transpired. Kashan remained his only true friend, a soulmate who had stood by him during his darkest hours. He was the only one who knew the whole truth and didn't judge, didn't turn his back on Jermaine. Their friendship had grown stronger than ever, a bond forged in the crucible of tragedy. "Hey!" a familiar voice called from behind him, and Kashan sat down next to him on the bench, his eyes full of concern. "How are you?" "I'm okay," Jermaine answered, his voice now calmer, learning to move on, learning to accept the painful truth. "Your father? How's he doing?" "He's hanging in there. He says he deserves his punishment, but he worries about me, always asking about my studies and my health." They were silent for a moment, staring at the water, the setting sun reflecting beautifully on the lake's surface, creating a peaceful scene in stark contrast to the events they had endured. "You know," Jermaine said finally, his voice thoughtful, full of newfound maturity, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about Shanice, about my father, about myself. I can't blame just her or just myself. We all made choices that led to this. And now what?" Jermaine looked at Kashan, his eyes holding a painful maturity that a 17-year-old shouldn't have, a deep understanding of life's complexities and human nature. "Now, I have to make the right choice. Move on. Maybe one day help others who are in a similar situation, those who are struggling with illness, with prejudice, with secrets." The sun was beginning to set, coloring the lake orange and red, like a beautiful painting, a sign that a new day, a new beginning, would come after the dark night. It was a contrasting image to the gloomy night that had enveloped this place, a symbol of hope and rebirth. Jermaine stood up, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Let's get out of here. I have nothing more to do at this lake." He turned his back to the lake, to the painful past, and walked towards the future, uncertain but filled with hope and determination. He was no longer the innocent boy he once was. He had grown, stronger, and ready to face whatever life brought him. The lesson he learned was harsh. Secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually be exposed, and wrong choices, no matter how small, can lead to horrific consequences. This story is a reminder that trust is invaluable, and betrayal can destroy everything. It also shows that societal prejudices, the simmering racism, can contribute to personal tragedies. But most importantly, he learned that even in the deepest darkness, there can be a glimmer of forgiveness, of family love, and of a new beginning if we dare to face the truth and choose the right path.